Okay, so we're finally here. We're finally ready to rebuild the entire engine and finish the Satsuma. Now, if you've been following my previous guide, and you've been following my guide on how to make money, you should have more than enough money to buy all the new parts you need for this challenge. Now, obviously, we're going to be rebuilding the engine at Futari's shops. You're going to want to grab all of the parts that you cannot purchase at the shop, including the air filter, cylinder head, exhaust manifold, flywheel, engine block. It's also a good idea to attach the main bearing to the engine block before you put it in the car. That way they don't go flying around in the back of the car and you lose them or you have trouble finding them. One important tip, and possibly an exploit I suppose you could use, is the engine block is a physical object like the beer case was in previous builds. So you can basically use the engine block as a way to flip over vehicles. I might try to use this as some kind of tip later on, but it's a good idea. You'll also want to grab the clutch cover plate and clutch pressure plate. You can attach the two together to make it easier to put the car together. Grab the distributor, the transmission, timing cover, camshaft gear, water pump pulley, oil pan, drive gear, inspection cover for the transmission, timing chain, crankshaft pulley, carburetor, and lastly the valve cover. Now if you want, you can repaint these, but I chose not to for this video. Don't forget the engine plate as well. And that's everything you need for a complete engine rebuild. So with that out of the way, we've got the Rusco loaded, we've got everything we need. Take the Rusco down to Futari's shop. Now normally I would take the van, but because I haven't been given the van yet, unfortunately I'm going to have to take the Rusco down with me. So let's go ahead and do this. Once you arrive at Futari's shop, we can now go ahead and buy all brand new parts for the Satsuma. Now you can only buy these specific parts when they are not attached to the engine. So if you have a complete fully built engine, you can't buy any parts. So well, I'll show you what parts you should buy for a complete engine rebuild. So normally you don't want to buy a new block or a new oil pan because those are only meant to be purchased if you blow a piston and you have a hole in your block. The transmission you could buy if you want, but the transmission is one of the longest lasting parts in your arsenal of parts you can buy. All you want to buy here is just the ones I'm buying right here, which is the pistons, head gasket, starter, alternator, fuel pump, and stuff like that. Now, with all the parts purchased, it should run you a little bit over $5 grand for all of the parts. Now, it sounds like a lot of money, but if you're using the same strategy I have, you should be no problem. The first thing you want to do is you want to grab your engine block and you want to take off all of the main bearings off of the block. This is so we can install the crankshaft. Once the crankshaft is installed, we can reattach the main bearings and bolt them down. Each main bearing uses two 9mm bolts. Next, you want to attach your pistons and your head gasket. Each piston uses two 7mm bolts. Next, we install the oil pan. The oil pan uses 8 7mm bolts and one 13mm bolt for the oil drain plug. Now install the cylinder head. The cylinder head uses 10 7mm bolts. Next, install the rocker shaft. The rocker shaft is held in place by 5 8mm bolts. Next, install the valve cover. The valve cover is held in place by 6 7mm bolts. Now, I should have probably installed this before, but next thing you can install is the camshaft. The camshaft uses two 5mm bolts. Now attach the camshaft gear to the end of the camshaft. The camshaft gear uses one 10mm bolt. Now, you're going to have to align it for correct timing. You'll see two ticks, one tick on the camshaft gear and one tick on the block itself and on the crankshaft. We want to line up those ticks perfectly so they line up so they have proper timing. Once they're aligned properly, you can install the timing chain. Next, install the timing chain cover. The timing cover uses 6 6mm bolts. Next, we install the crankshaft pulley. The crankshaft pulley is held in place by one 11mm bolt. Now we install the water pump. The water pump uses 6 7mm bolts. Next is the water pump pulley. The water pump pulley uses 4 7mm bolts. I think you're starting to see a pattern here. I found that the most popular or most used bolt sizes on this engine are 7mm bolts. I'm pretty sure like at least half the bolts used on this engine are 7mm, which is kind of funny actually. Next, install the engine plate. Now we install the starter. The starter uses two 7mm bolts. Next, you can put in the distributor. The distributor uses a screwdriver to put it in place. Next, install the flywheel. The flywheel uses six 7mm bolts. Now attach the clutch to the clutch pressure plate. The clutch is held in place with six 6mm bolts. Next, install the fuel pump. The fuel pump is held in place by two 7mm bolts. Next, attach the air filter to the carburetor. The air filter is held in place by two 6mm bolts. Then attach the carburetor to the cylinder head, which is held in place by four 8mm bolts. Then install the exhaust headers, which are held in place by five 8mm bolts. Next, we install the transmission. Now you're going to want to put the transmission inspection cover on first before you put in the six 7mm bolts. There is also one 10mm bolt that is attached to the block. Next, we install the drive gear. The drive gear is held in place by seven 6mm bolts. Next, we install the alternator. The alternator has one 7mm bolt on the front and one 10mm bolt in the back. It's also a screw to be used for alternator belt adjustment, but for right now we'll leave it unscrewed in. With the engine completed, I decided to head to town to pay for my post order, pick up the remaining stuff I'll need to complete the build, and then I'll pick up the engine later. I was also going to the store in hopes that the van would spawn at the inspection shop, but unfortunately it did not. Okay, now that we're at the store, here's what you'll need. Alternator belt, 4 bottles of brake fluid, 1 bottle of oil, 1 oil filter, and 1 box of spark plugs. And since I was already here, I decided to go ahead and pay for my post order so I could get the air to fuel ratio gauge to tune my car later in the video. With everything loaded, it was time to head back and collect the engine. I decided to take advantage of Pena to tow my car back to my house, to take advantage of, well, saving gas and also saving the fact I'll be wasting time if the car breaks down. So, it's a good idea sometimes. Pena only managed to get me home halfway before he spun out, so I decided to use the engine to kill him. And yes, you can kill him with the engine, and as far as I know, it doesn't count as manslaughter. So, that's a plus, I guess. Okay, so now that we're finally home, I'm going to show you how to install the engine and wire it up, as well as some basic tuning if you have to. My way of installing the engine is a very simple process. First, grab the beer case. You want to place the beer case roughly in the center of the subframe, as close as you possibly can. Pre-equip your 11mm wrench for the engine mounts. Try to grab the engine as far away from yourself as possible and gently set it down on top of the beer case. Don't worry, if it looks like it's cockeyed, it's fine. As long as you can line up the bolts properly, once you get one bolt, it should mount itself in place. And then simply, just bolt in the rest of them. And it's as simple as that. No fucking around with the engine hoist. Just beer case and your pure muscle. There's also a similar strategy I use to taking out the engine that I'll probably do in another video. Now that we have all the things we need to finish building the engine, let's first start out with the spark plug. Each spark plug goes on the spark plug wells on the cylinder head. These spark plugs are bolted in, or not bolted in, I guess they're like tightened with the spark plug wrench. Pretty straightforward. Next is the oil filter. Oil filter is attached to the block, and it is screwed in by hand, like a true Chad. No oil filter wrench is needed for this job. Now it's time to put in the alternator belt. Now, like I said earlier, don't screw in the adjustment screw on the alternator just yet. We will need to adjust it later. Also, make sure to adjust the alternator's position so it's pushed as far forward as possible. You won't be able to put the alternator belt on otherwise. That's another reason why to leave the adjustment screw unscrewed. Now it's time to add brake fluid to the brake master cylinder and clutch master cylinder. The brake master cylinder uses roughly 2 or 1.5 bottles, I think, and the clutch master cylinder uses around 1. Now I said to buy 4 earlier because just in case you didn't tighten some of your brake lining or clutch lining all the way, so that way it might leak a little bit. So it's always good to have an extra bottle in case you missed a bolt here or there and it leaks a little. Now we add the engine oil, pretty straightforward. Now we have to install our radiator hoses. So there is 2 lower hoses and 1 upper hose. Each hose has 1 screw at the end of each hose. Now for the coolant section, there's a reason why I didn't buy any coolant at the store, because you can use your own piss for the coolant. Now as far as I know, piss versus coolant, it doesn't really seem to have any effect on how well the engine will cool itself. So realistically, you can use either, to be honest. And it saves you about a couple hundred marks. So I mean, why not? The radiator takes around 1 1/4 full piss meters. So that's basically enough to fill the radiator. Now this next section is really necessary. This is just me installing all of the parts that I ordered in my post order, which includes the rear spoiler, the front splitter, the seat covers, and stuff like that. One thing I will focus on is the marker lights, which are held in place by 1 6mm bolt each. I'll also be showing you how to wire them in a bit when I do the wiring portion of this video. Now for the muffler, and obviously the dual muffler exhaust I bought from the catalog, this is held both in place by 1 7mm bolt. Up next is the air to fuel mixture gauge. This is simply just kind of, I don't know, just attached to the dashboard with no bolts or screws. Next is the radio antennas. Each one of these is held in place by 1 8mm bolt at the back of the car. And now it's time for the wiring portion of the Satsuma. So typically I start from the back here. I go for the rear harness and I connect the rear wiring harness to the taillights. Next you want to connect the rear wiring harness to the fuel tank. It can be a little bit tricky to locate, but once you've got it, it should be all set. Back to the front of the car, you want to wire up each marker light to the front headlight harness. Then you want to connect the headlight connector to the main harness connector. Connect the regulator to the main harness connector. Connect the main harness connector to the positive terminal. Connect the main harness connector to the ignition coil. Connect the main harness to the radiator fan connector. Now connect instrument panel 1 and instrument panel 2 to the fuse box. Now connect the ignition switch to the fuse box. Now connect the radio to the radio harness. Now this can be a little bit tricky. You might have to angle yourself out of the car or get into the engine bay to do it, but there's usually a sweet spot you can find to get it connected. Now connect the light switch to the dash harness connector. Connect the air to fuel ratio gauge to the dash harness connector. Now bolt in your negative terminal to the battery ground connector. The battery ground connector is the bolt on the top of the starter, which is bolted to the engine plate. Don't forget to bolt it back in after you've wired it, or else your starter will fall out. Now wire up the regulator to the alternator, and then wire the positive terminal to the starter. The starter wire is held in by a 5mm nut. And that's basically all you need. Now the only thing left now is to hook up the battery and see if this thing fires up. Now, when you want to hook up your battery, you want to grab an 8mm wrench and you want to tighten the positive terminal first, not the negative. I don't know why, but if you do that, then a lot of sparks happen and you can start a fire, and that's not good. Okay, now let's see if this thing actually starts. So, when you get into the Satsuma, it's a good idea to pull the choke out, just so it'll help you get the car warmed up. So let's see if this thing turns over. Future me here, I forgot to put fuel in it. After putting some fuel in it, it's time to start it up again. And there you go. Your Satsuma is now started. Now, immediately, what you want to do, or before you start it, you want to have a screwdriver in hand. But as soon as it gets started, you want to adjust your alternator so the belt is properly tensioned. If it's too tight, it'll break the belt. But if it's too loose, it'll fall off. Once it's properly adjusted, screw the adjustment screw back in. You'll know it's probably adjusted when the squeaking stops. So just scroll with your mouse wheel until it's just right. And that's it. Now, we're going to wait for the car to warm up here and see if it needs any more tuning. Now that it's safe to say our Satsuma is finally started and completely finished, I think now is a good time to put on the hood. The hood is held in place by 4 6mm. Now, I was going to make a segment here about how to tune your valve train and how to tune your distributor. And also how to tune your air-to-fuel ratio, obviously. Now, at the time of the recording, I didn't hear any ticking from the distributor. I didn't hear any ticking from the valves. So I figured, oh, maybe my valves are okay, maybe my distributor's okay. Obviously, they're not. Actually, typically, I don't even tune my own valve train or distributor, because usually I just have Fleetari do it for me. Now, I mean, I know that kind of defeats the purpose of, oh, it's supposed to be a guide, Snazzy, you're supposed to show us everything. Well, that's the one thing I probably don't do myself. Now, there are plenty of guides on Reddit on how to make crazy horsepower gains by tuning your valves or tuning your distributor or something like that. Like, I've seen people get like 200 horsepower from a stock Satsuma with just a GT carburetor. And while it's a lot of power, it's mostly at the high end, and most of the time your engine won't last more than maybe 200 kilometers, maybe, before it blows up. So yes, there are definitely ways to improve horsepower gains with valve timing, or with like valve tuning and ignition timing and stuff like that, but I'm not really in that deep into the tuning part of that. I just tune my air-to-fuel ratio, and if I want more power, then I'll put nitrous on it. That's basically it. Another reason you can see why I didn't tune it, because at the time when I was driving, I thought, oh hey, the car seems to have a lot of power, seems pretty peppy. I thought, oh, it probably doesn't need a lot of tuning. Now, I would only take it for a quick spin. Under any circumstances, I would advise against driving the car with the shitty tires you found from the mansion, because 2 of those tires are at super low condition and could pop at any moment. A better option would it be to go find the GT wheels and get those, have Fleetari put new tires on those first. And the only reason why I use these wheels to begin with was to get the car off the ground so I can install the fuel tank and exhaust and any undercarriage stuff that would fall off if the car. So that's basically it. But yeah, that's it. That's basically the complete guide of how to build your engine, how to wire up your engine, and how to attach your engine without using the engine hoist. And probably the next video will probably be me showing you how to get the car inspected, showing you what you can and can't put on the car that will pass or fail inspection, and getting the car street legal. Well, anyway, that's pretty much about does it for this video. It took like way longer than I thought it would, but I think it came out pretty good. So I hope you guys find this guide helpful. I hope that you guys enjoy it, or have enjoyed it. So until next time, I will see you all in the next video. Have a good night, everybody.